Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, The Information Missing from Your EMR, How to Find It, and What to Do with It. I am Aaliyah Pavala with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation, and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, I am pleased to introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Cheryl Petersilge is the founder and CEO of Vidagos Advisors, an enterprise imaging strategy firm. A respected physician, imaging leader, and innovative engineer, Dr. Petersilge provides extensive expertise as a pioneer in enterprise imaging with deep knowledge in healthcare informatics. As an internationally known radiologist and highly regarded physician leader at the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Petersilge held numerous chair and medical director positions in radiology and information technology. Colleen Cyril serves as the Chief Clinical Officer for Highland Healthcare. Colleen's primary responsibilities include evolving Highland's global healthcare business, understanding healthcare trends, and business needs, which drive the evolution of Highland's on-base healthcare offerings. Colleen has more than 12 years of experience at Highland Software and 25 years of experience in the healthcare industry. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Colleen to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone joining us today. We're going to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart and to Cheryl's heart. What's missing from your EMR? So the challenge that we have today is with all the great work that we're doing and all the technology, we just simply still are not gathering all of the content out there, making it available for the provider team real time at the point of care. And so Cheryl and I are going to be sharing with you our experiences in what's missing and some strategies about how you start to look for that and gather that up. Cheryl, I'll turn that over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen, and thank you, Beckers, for allowing me to participate in this webinar. As Colleen said, this is a topic that I have a great interest in, and so I'm really looking forward to exploring the topic in greater detail today. So a couple things that we need to talk about first, and that is differentiating the electronic health record from the electronic medical record, because in theory, they really are two very different concepts, and I am using the information provided by the ONC at the healthit.gov website for my definitions. So if we think about the EHR, it contains all of the information involved in a patient's care, and that information is going to come from multiple different sources, and it is going to encompass everything that has been done to take care of the patient. And the idea of the electronic health record is it's going to follow the patient wherever they go, and it's information that we're going to share along the entire care continuum, and this information is going to be updated in real time. Contrast that with the definition of the electronic medical record, which is really meant to be the digital representation of a physician's paper chart. And it includes all of the information that's generated during the interaction between a care provider and that patient. And as you can see here, this information is really a subset of the EHR, and it's going to include a wide variety of information, anywhere from medical care to surgical care. And is going to include information that's in the radiology information systems or the cardiology information systems. Then we have documents, and we all think of, documents are scanned pieces of paper. We're trying to eliminate them, but we're not going to 100% eliminate paper, at least not in the near term. But really in your document management system, you're also going to get information that's integrated from other devices. So this is another component of the electronic health record. It's typically its own separate archive, and that archive is integrated with the electronic medical record. Then you have your enterprise imaging ecosystem, which is exactly what it sounds like, and that's all of the images from across the enterprise, not just radiology or cardiology, but pathology, photographs, ophthalmology, and when we think about it, almost every subspecialty generates some form of medical images, especially now that smartphones are really an extension of the physician, generating a lot of great information. And then lastly, I'm going to include the genomics data, and where we're going to store this genomics data and how we're going to access it in the future really is in a state of flux. But again, all of this information is part of a patient's electronic health information that's contained in the electronic health record. Now, if we think about it, the electronic medical record today is where our providers work, and it serves as the gateway to all of these different archives. So in a sophisticated EMR ecosystem, you're going to have access to your document management system, you're going to have access to your enterprise imaging system, and sometime in the future, you'll have some form of access to genomic data. And if we think about it, in a lot of systems right now, the RIS and the cardiology information systems tend to be different vendors than the EMR. But we're seeing that, especially in radiology, there's a trend towards moving towards the EMR-based radiology information system. So this integration is just going to become tighter and tighter. And if done well, the uninitiated really doesn't realize they've left the EMR and they've gone to the document management viewer, or they've actually gone to the enterprise image viewer. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I think part of this is why we start to confuse the EMR with the EHR. But I think for today's discussion, and I think for the way an organization approaches managing this information, we really need to be aware of the differences between the EMR and our enterprise content management systems that include documents and images. And in the end, once we really are able to truly deploy artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence, whatever definition you want to give to AI, it's not going to just be deployed to look at a nodule in a CT scan, but it's actually going to pull data from all of these different sources of data in the electronic health record and really get a comprehensive overview of the patient that feeds into these AI engines. So,
Cheryl,
one of the things,
Cheryl,
yes.
One of the things that I think our listeners might be interested in, and you and I've had this conversation in terms of AI. Is AI around the corner, or is AI far out? You know, how do we start to envision when AI is going to really affect our clinical practice?
So I believe AI in very, very narrow applications, we're going to start to see that pretty soon. And I'm thinking about, my perspective in radiology. I think we're going to see those smart work lists where some engine is running and it detects potential blood in the head and moves that study up to the top of a work list. or potential pneumothorax and move that up to the top of the work list. I think we're going to see that, and I welcome that because it really is going to help us take care of those critical patients in as fast a time as possible. I think the next wave we might see is the ubiquitous use of looking at the pixel data for lung nodules, the stuff that's beyond the human eye, beyond just looking at the size and is it solid, semi-solid, and getting to some more sophisticated ways of evaluating that. But these are such small use cases that to really harness the full potential of here's John Doe's medical record and what's he really at risk for? How should we be getting towards that precision medicine to take care of John Doe? I think we're a ways off on that.
Yeah. And I think that your perspective and as you and I are engaging with health systems all across North America, some, large academic IDNs, some are community-based organizations. I think we see the same thing. Operationally, we're still trying to figure out how to get from what we have today to care for patients in the next number of years with this kind of vision of AI. And what we're talking about in terms of the construct, I often have customers that will say, I just want to take all that stuff that was in the physician in the record, and I just want to put it on a belt and have it scanned. Can't we just do that? And it seems so easy, but really the challenge is there's still a lot of content that's hiding in the organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's so true. To reflect. Yeah.
Yes. So, hence the unstructured focus of our talk. And part of it is the unstructured nature of it, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but also just the way we're managing this data. And the organizations really have a streamlined, standardized approach to how clinicians can access this data, or are they just having to go through hoops and loops to get from point A to point B? I remember one of the big challenges we were dealing with before I left the Cleveland Clinic was colonoscopy reports, very important for screening, very important for managing populations. And in a lot of the physicians' offices, these reports were coming from other private physicians' offices, and they were coming on paper, and then they were being scanned in. But they didn't have a way to readily get to that data. And it was a real challenge for them, and it was adding time to their day. And, in this age of provider burnout, that's the last thing that we want to be doing. We really want to be allowing them to get to the relevant data pertinent to their practice in a very, very easy fashion. So we want the connection between point A and point B to be very straight. Now, if we look at unstructured data, because I want to make sure we're all talking using the same thought process about what unstructured data is. And so in its essence, unstructured data is data that doesn't fit well into an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't fit nicely into rows and columns. And documents are a perfect example. That data is all in text format. And by that definition, imaging data also is not unstructured. It is unstructured data because it doesn't fit well into rows and columns. And, I have here from that, very robust resource of Wikipedia what their definition of unstructured data is. And we have lots of unstructured data in medicine. We've talked about documents, and we have the DICOM radiology and cardiology studies, but we have lots of waveforms and audio files and videos and photographs. And I did search to see if I could find a number, what percentage of healthcare information is unstructured. And the numbers I found were between 15 and 20%, which I personally think is an underestimate, because most of the sources I read didn't really consider imaging data. And imaging data is so important in medical decision making today. And to be making decisions about our patients with a 20% gap in knowledge, I don't think our patients would like to hear that. And I know most of our clinicians don't like doing that. They want to make the best decision they can for the patient, the best informed decision that they could make for their patients. And so we want to make sure that we get them all of this data in an easy to access fashion. So we were kind of interested. Go on, Colleen.
Oh, no. You know what, Cheryl, I think that, you hit something really important. And at Highland, we have been trying to quantify this data as well. And we talk with customers pre-implementation. We work with them long-term to understand what is missing and where is that gap. It's so hard to identify because all of this is unstructured. I think some of the best places to try and find in your organization, for our listeners, the best place to try and find this is partnering with the HIM department. And they work to think about, to track, to monitor, and to report on where is unstructured external correspondence coming from, whether patients are bringing that in, whether it's third party or reference labs sending information in, whether it's the odd thing that shows up from a payer. That is an important component of a patient record. Think about risk management and the collaboration that needs to happen over the continuum of care. So, one word of advice for any of our listeners is develop a great working relationship with your department, because they track things and they're always willing to help quantify this for your organization. And it's really key. People don't know what they don't know. And so if you start to think about how to show what's out there and what's available, it will ultimately impact in a very positive way your doctors and nurses in their clinical care.
I agree. HIM was such a great partner of mine, both for document management and for image management. I really valued their input tremendously. So, and the other thing when we talk about this data is how do you quantify it? Do you quantify it by how many bytes of data you have, which, imaging is going to really win out there? How do you quantify percentage of data, but really percentage of information about the patient? So it's really hard to decide what units you want to use when you're thinking about this as well.
Yeah.
So we were really interested in finding out kind of where our audience is in terms of some of this. So we do have some polling questions. I'll read the question, and then we'll give you about 15 seconds to answer, and then we'll review the responses to the poll questions. And so right now we have 3 poll questions coming up back to back. So the first one is, my organization currently has a strategy to manage enterprise digital documents. And the answers are yes, we have a partial solution, we've been discussing it, or we're not considering it. So we'll sort of start our 15 seconds here. Give you a minute to answer. And of course, I don't have a second hand on my watch, but I'm going to assume that was good enough time. You think, Colleen?
I think we're good. Yep.
Okay, so let's see what our answers are.
So of those that participated, 26.7% said, yes, we have we have a strategy. But I think what's interesting is how many of those strategies are partial at 36.7%, and or in discussion at 30%. What makes me happy is that the lowest is we are not considering it at 6.7%, which I think this very much aligns with what we hear, across North America. We know it's important. We know we need to do something about it. One of the things that I have found is even in organizations that say we are completely paperless, there's still content hiding in the organization, particularly tying those medical images to the digital content. So, second question.
Okay, so our second question is, my organization currently has a strategy to manage enterprise images. And so this is everything, not just radiology and cardiology. And the answers are yes. We have a partial solution. We have been discussing it, or we are not considering it. All right, are we ready for our answers? So terrific.
Okay, so
yeah,
this is really great. This
yeah.
This makes Cheryl and I happy that people are having those conversations and they're thinking about holistically both the diagnostic medical images and the digital and unstructured content. So good.
Yeah, this is terrific. Really, really glad to hear this. And I think, for those people who are interested in, maturity models, both document management and image management strategies are finding their ways to lower and lower levels of the maturity models, indicating that it's just becoming an expectation. So great for the organizations. So here we just see, I see the benefit of a strategy for managing unstructured documents, images, and associated metadata. And the answers here would be yes, maybe, or no. Okay, ready?
Excellent. So seeing 77%, a little higher of the group saying, yep, understanding the benefit is important. And we had 0 no responders. So this helps Cheryl and I guide the next pieces of our talk. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. So if you're not thinking about it, you're not sure, let's talk about why do clinicians need this information, or what are they doing with this information? So remember, our goal is to keep them in their EMR-based workflow, right? So we want to present them. Let's talk about images first. And there are studies out there that show many specialists are not going to be happy just reviewing radiology reports. They actually need to see those images, and as you would expect, surgeons like orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeons, pulmonologists are all very interested in seeing the images. And so we want to make sure we present them with that information in their workflow, and in their workflow regardless of where they are. But it's interesting, both the radiology literature and the photography literature show that the patient's ability to view their medical images is very important to them, and it actually helps them better connect with their disease process. And when they better connect with their disease process, they're more engaged in their care. So we've activated patient engagement, which is very important as we move in this value-based world. And this was a little surprising to me, I have to admit, seeing their images really helped patients improve their trust in the doctor-patient relationship. And this is in more than one study that this result has been validated. And what we learned when we did surveys of our patients as we were moving into presenting radiology images in the electronic medical record, we actually did some interviews with our providers and their patients in the same interview. And we had one gentleman who, has a cancer currently and was able to view his images with the provider. And actually what that did is it turned the computer from that barrier in the doctor-patient relationship to actually a tool between the patient and the physician to help enhance that visit. And the patient said seeing his current cancer really changed his whole outlook on it and really just made him own that disease better than when he had a different cancer 10 years previously and couldn't see the images, didn't see the images. He felt a little disconnected and just didn't feel as engaged in his process. So really very important, and we're actually seeing that physicians not only using the computer in the office visit, but when they can actually view the images on round, can turn their iPad or their mobile phone into a tool to use when they're visiting the patients in the hospital. And we're seeing a lot of benefit from them being able to do that. Similarly with documents and, providers, maybe more in the office setting, are able to have all of that information at their fingertips when they are seeing a patient. And, if you have that information in the document management system, more than one person has access to that information at a time. Whereas if you have a paper chart and the patient changed their visit and the patient's chart is in your other office and they come in to see you in this office, you don't have access to all of that information, so you've increased your gap in knowledge about the patient. Same thing happens up on the hospital floor. If all of your outside records are stored in a paper chart and that paper chart hasn't hit the floor yet, you don't have the complete set of information about the patient. And one thing, again, that I want to stress about the document management systems is you don't have to go from, let's take an EKG device. You don't go from the EKG machine to a printout and then scan it back in so that that EKG is available through the EMR, but you actually integrate those devices right into your document management system so you could eliminate that intermediate physical media of the paper. Expand the concept of what you think about the capabilities of the document management system. And I will say, we have photos up here in a couple different places, and I really think photos are in the gray zone. Depending on what your organization's strategy is, you could store photos in your document management system, or you could store photos in your enterprise imaging system. The real goal here is to be consistent, because when they open up that viewer, you want them to be able to look at the whole photographic history of the patient, regardless of which viewer or system they're pulling from.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is we want to give our providers the right information at the right time in the right workflow. And that information has to be identifiable. So we're going to talk about metadata in a minute. And available and integrated, that EMR-based workflow, so key. Colleen, you wanted to say something?
You know, I wanted to drive home for any of our guests that are coming from an IT perspective. You're often the first folks to say, you know, in 2020, the ability to integrate is key, and frankly, it's the expectation. There are so many different ways using technology to be able to integrate in a standard way. Sometimes it just takes some thoughtfulness and also the conversation with your vendor. So I would give everybody the permission to ask their vendor if anybody is saying, no, the best way to do this is print something out and rescan it in. I would say challenge that. For those of us that spend our lives talking about external unstructured content, we'd like to get rid of the printer and recognize that electronic capture of this will improve quality and make everyone's life easier.
I agree. And, you know, in the IT literature across all industries, not just healthcare, but, you know, your mantra should be simplify, standardize, automate. And that integration just helps you achieve all of those. You remove the human factor, and, you know, that helps eliminate errors and make things go faster.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, let's talk about identifiable information, because I'm sure a lot of people on this phone are in organizations that have data or information governance groups. What I'm curious to know are, do those data and information governance groups even tackle the information that's in the enterprise content management system, or do they think about the information that's in their imaging archives? And it is so important that we treat these document and image assets like every other asset in our organization, and you have to properly label them. And the only way you're going to do that is through centralized, agreed upon, common terminology and common definitions in an organization. And unfortunately, we in the healthcare industry are woefully behind in terms of, as an industry, having common terminology and common study descriptors. Even radiology, which is highly structured, still falls down on not having standardized study descriptors between organizations, or one of the enterprise imaging community's big effort is to try and develop or to select an existing body part ontology for all of us to use to aid interoperability, and both interoperability within the archive. So if I'm a cardiologist, when I sit down, potentially the archive could open and just show me everything related to heart or chest, or heart and lungs and chest. And I don't necessarily care about the broken bone, but if I'm an orthopedic surgeon, I could sit down and just see everything that's the hip, whether it's a CT, an MR, a photograph, whatever. So, you know, without this common terminology, our data is not as searchable or as filterable as we would like. And again, that contributes to that snarly mess of information. But when we have good standardization, we straighten that line out from point A to point B. So we are going to actually have two more poll questions at this point. So let's go to our first polling question, and that is who in your organization is driving your document management strategy? Is it the CIO, the CMIO, an IT medical director, HIM, or some other component of your organization? All right, I'm going to give a little extra time because people may have to kind of consider that. Let's see.
Okay. So in this case, the CIO is at the top of the feedback at 40.7%. What's interesting is number two is other. And one of the reasons Cheryl and I wanted to ask this polling question and the subsequent question is there is no right answer, and there's a lot of confusion that we see in organizations about who's really driving the strategy. What I would share with you from a best practice and experience, the CMIO needs to be involved in the conversation to a greater extent than most organizations have them today. I see the most successful organization having a collaboration between the CIO and the CMIO. And you may stop and think, why? The CMIO is very focused on the structured data within the EMR and the content that's driving the medical practice. But our thesis is really about all of the data that needs to be there, and the unstructured, bringing structure to it is tied so tightly into the strategies that the CMIO is leading. And so having those conversations is really important. Cheryl also mentioned the HIMSS adoption models, and those adoption models looking at the outcomes and the data from that typically being led by the CMIO. And so then again, it's important to have that leader involved in the conversation.
And again, Colleen, I think some of this might reflect that perception that all EHR is in the EMR and not branching out the scope of where information is in the organization. I think it's very, very important. And it's very challenging. Setting up this standardization, it means you have to say no to people. And I always call it has to be enterprisable. So if I do create this document type for this department, can I create it and support it for every other department in the organization? And if the answer is no, unless you have a compliance or a legal reason to do it, you can't do it. And you have to find other ways to get that metadata in there to meet the searchability and filtering capabilities that we're saying are so necessary. So the next question is the same question, but for your image management strategy. So again, who in your organization is driving your image management or enterprise imaging strategy? Is it the CIO or the CMIO, the IT medical director, HIM radiology, or other? All right, let's take a look at the results. And Colleen, before you talk about the results, I'm going to ask people if they would be willing to put in the chat box if your answer was other, who it is. I'm just really curious, and I think it could help all of us on this call understand all the different areas that are managing this. Just put in documents, you know, so-and-so, enterprise so-and-so, and we'll try and read those off as we're nearing the end of this talk, so everybody can see that information.
Yeah. And I think the results that we're seeing, Cheryl, reflect some changes over the last couple of years where organizations are looking at the work that's traditionally done in radiology being a part of the broader information organization. So I like seeing that folks see the CIO as really driving that image management strategy. I'm surprised that we didn't see, again, more of the CMIO involved, and if we had no one that responded to the CMIO. And of course, traditionally, the work done with medical imaging has been matured through our radiology departments in our organizations, and so they obviously are a key piece to this strategy. But think about all the departments that have images that don't report up through radiology. So Cheryl was talking earlier about at the Cleveland Clinic and her experience about the challenge to get the colonoscopy images and data, and from third-party organizations and et cetera. And traditionally those are managed up through the GI department and not necessarily through radiology. Think about the other images that are out there around the organization, and so that's where more strategic and thoughtful approach that we'll talk about in a little bit is going to really help find those pockets of hidden information.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this actually fits with what I'm seeing in the organizations that I'm consulting with is the CMIO is not as engaged as I would like. And my philosophy is that clinical, technical partnership is so powerful. Each one, together they're more than the sum of the parts. And that's something I really like to stress to organizations that I like to see. And I think that, again, bringing the CMIO along would be really important. And while we're here, we do have a question that says, what is the link of radiology to CMIO for image management? So for image management here, we're really talking about all images for the entire organization, so radiology, cardiology, photography, multimedia reports. And my perception of the CMIO is that they offer that clinical voice about how information is going to be used by the clinician and how it is going to be presented by the clinician. And, our concept that, Colleen and I are discussing today is that that's all integrated using the EMR as the gateway. And so, I see the CMIO as being the master of that EMR gateway. And so while they may not be directly responsible, they should at least have some tie to it. So, maybe that's what we're seeing reflected here is that maybe they're not driving it, but they're engaged with it. We don't have all those nuances in the question. So,
that makes sense.
I would say my role as a clinic, initially I reported right to the CMIO. who, well, actually I reported right to the CIO, who happened to be a physician and was very, very interested in what was happening to medical images. Not so much the case in other organizations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the responders, Cheryl, made a great point in talking about who the other may be. And we've been talking a lot about structures inside healthcare hospital organizations, but there may be some other really important others, particularly in ambulatory settings. In this example, they've mentioned in free clinics, the medical director is going to be really instrumental in making sure that information is going to be available for the benefit of the community health model. So that's a great point that we want to make sure everybody hears. That sometimes the model, depending on the mission of your organization, may be a little bit different.
Right, right. Yes, and I have to admit I come from a very hospital-based focus, and all the associated ambulatory centers, but freestanding ambulatory practices I don't have as great a perspective on. So thank you very much for that information. So we're going to kind of wind up with just a little bit of a conversation about metadata and its importance, and so we're going to come at it starting with the DICOM metadata that you see in radiology. Very structured, more standardized than a lot of other metadata, but still not 100% standardized. And if we think about data, there's patient metadata, a lot of the demographics, medical record number and such, exam metadata, which, in radiology, who ordered it, why did they order it, what's the study they ordered, what's the accession number, and then the object metadata, which is going to tell you, how was this acquired at the machine level. And so for an exam, we might see that there's Joe Smith, and he had a CT of the head for acute trauma, and we know the doctor that ordered it, and I know exactly how the images were acquired, and I could tell you every piece of information here I have used at one time or another in interpreting studies. And so we know that this metadata is always going to be there, and it provides us a wealth of information about the study. Now, we're not going to talk about DICOM versus XDS. DICOM comes with a big metadata overhead and some, inefficiencies associated with that. XDS doesn't come with the same kind of metadata requirements, but it also means there's a lot less standardization. But when we get into that type of metadata, we have patient metadata still. We have to identify who all this information belongs to. In the document world, we're going to have metadata about who maybe scanned it, what department scanned it, what the scan date was, what type of document it is there a subcategory for the document, is there a description for the document, but we really don't get a whole lot of object metadata. So, we don't know the colonoscopy, we don't get a lot of data about how the colonoscopy was performed or anything about the images there, unless they happen to be stored in a DICOM repository. But again, this is the type of information we're going to get in a document, but we're really missing, I think, a lot of richer data about that document that would be useful to a clinician. And if you think back a couple slides, we talked about using machine learning to try and extract some of the information that's in this unstructured data to convert the unstructured data to structured data. Maybe for the colonoscopy, positive, negative, who did it, when the date that it was done, so we know when the 10-year period expires and we have to, have another colonoscopy. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we present this data. So we talk about integrated launches and interfaced launches, and really the integrated launch is the launch where the viewer, whether it's your document viewer or your enterprise imaging viewer, launches within the EMR window. And this is the scenario where I said the uninitiated aren't even going to know that they're not in the EMR anymore. They still think that they're in the EMR. So they say, oh yeah, my radiology images are in the EMR, or my photographs are in the EMR. They're really not. And again, we mix up our language, EMR, EHR, which is fine for the average provider. But for those on this phone call who are really engaged in building that infrastructure and building those workflows, it's really important for us to acknowledge these differences. There's the interface launch where you're in the EMR and you click on a link and a new viewing window opens up. And there are safety risks associated with this because theoretically you could have, 5 patients open in your EMR, and you could have 5 imaging windows opened up, and there's the potential to misassign images, like you're reading Joe Green's CT scan, but you're documenting in Mary Smith's chart. So, my recommendation is usually against the interface launch. You want to see that integrated launch. And, for the click police, the integrated launch actually has less link clicks to open it and less clicks to close it. So there are several different advantages to the integrated launch over the interface launch. Colleen, I don't know if you had any additional comments on that before.
And it's funny, I forgot we weren't on video, Cheryl, because I'm shaking my head. This is my favorite. This is my favorite point, and I think you speak to it eloquently from both the perspectives of having been the doctor navigating, but also the physician leader trying to help the clinical staff understand this. Paramount is the security, right? We need to make sure that we are on the right patient, documenting in the right location, and the risk associated with some of the strategies I've seen is enormous. So this integrated launch concept becomes really important. And folks are looking for more information. I think both Cheryl and I are happy to talk to you offline about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as we're getting ready to wrap up here, what is the vision? And I just love this image. Cheryl shared it with me the other day. This is the University Library at the University of Dublin that houses the Book of Kells. It is architecturally one of the most beautiful places you can ever visit. But I think what part of the beauty of this library is the symmetry, the ease. It actually, it's easy on your eyes. It doesn't seem overwhelming. And remember, they have almost 2,000 years of information there that anybody can access. And, how do we get to this kind of vision? And so what we wanted to be able to do was just give you some actions and things to think about after, all the information we've shared with you today. But there are kind of 6 key things that I ask my team to talk with our customers about. And first is, do you know where the gap is today? Because very often, we're not including certain types of content. Colonoscopy, ophthalmology tends to be one of those areas where people don't necessarily think about. Swallow studies, that's my secret. If anybody wants to take that, walk into any audiology OT lab, and they've got a desk filled with swallow studies. So the second is, do you have a digital front door strategy? Digital front door has been a concept that we've seen really evolve in COVID. This idea of, can I engage my patient at the very first point of interaction through a portal? Electronically, do they have an opportunity to share information back with the provider prior to their visit? How does the digital front door support telehealth, which I know everybody on this call is thinking about in some way? And how does that digital front door, how can we collect more information at that point and create a digitized experience at the point of interaction, first interaction with that patient? And I think, the research and some of the examples Cheryl was able to share with us today just highlights how important that front door experience is to patient satisfaction and ownership of their disease process. Thirdly, partnering with departments. So we've talked, this strategy has to be matrixed throughout the organization. We've shared areas like HIM, radiology, but also think about other ancillary departments in your organization that may have content either coming in or going out, and have those conversations with them to understand where this is generated and how to get this in as part of the EHR experience. Nothing is more important than doing a walkabout. So walking the halls, watching staff, you will see where those pockets of information is hidden. And having that conversation with frontline, the doctors and the nurses and the folks in lab, and asking them where they see the opportunity. And then, as we mentioned, collaborating with the governance committee is crucial in this. And this collaboration together with, leveraging interaction with some of the sponsors that we identified earlier in the polling can really help you build out on paper where you want to go. Ultimately, what we want to be able to get to or get away from is this chaos, right? If I had to go and see a patient and what was in front of me was just this pit of information, it would be a really tough work day every single day. And what we want for our providers is we want them to have this beautiful experience, like going to the library at the University College of Dublin and seeing order, being able to leverage all of that information about the patient to improve outcomes and drive patient health. And so we're at the end of our talk, but Cheryl and I certainly are love to engage with folks. So if you have follow-up questions or want to talk more about this, we would love to do that. I'll turn it back to our friends from Becker's to see if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl and Colleen, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. Please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard. We are up near the top of the hour, so I will quickly ask one question that came in. And Cheryl, I will have you take this first, and then Colleen, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. An audience member asked, do you see the information gap leading to frustration in internal communications? And if so, do you think that it impacts patient care at all, and to what extent?
I do believe that there is an information gap even within organizations. Think if there is some type of test, I don't know, pulmonary function test, colonoscopy, whatever, where the information is generated on paper and transmitted to another office, if you're an integrated system, that transit time, that whole time, the information isn't available. And think if the patient shows up in your office and you haven't gotten that result yet, that impacts the patient experience and that impacts patient care. So I think anytime there's a gap, there's an impact on patient care. I think how big the gap is very organizationally dependent. Even if, I don't know, say your radiologists still use a transcription system, they're not on voice recognition, and so even if it's electronic and it takes them 24 hours to generate a report, that's a gap in information, and that can certainly impact care. I mean, I think of the emergency department. You know, we generated reports that average 6 minutes from the time the study was completed to the time a report was generated. So it's going to depend on your organization, but if there is a gap, yes, it does impact patient care, and yes, it can happen within an organization.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think what we do today where we have these gaps is we often look to the patient or their family to fill the information in. And that becomes a real challenge, you know, when we're talking about trying to create a really high trust situation between the provider and the patient has to retell information or has to carry information. That erodes some of the trust that they have in their physician. And so, you know, what we can do to really improve patient care is collect the information once and have it available for everybody. And then the physician is focusing on the patient and assessment of that patient, and they have the background information versus having to spend the time, you know, for the patient and family to rehash things. So, you know, my view of a happy world is where that is all available at the fingertips and the clinical staff feels highly prepared for every patient interaction.
Great. Thank you so much for your insights, Cheryl and Colleen. That is all the time we have for today. I want to thank our presenters for their excellent presentation and Highland Healthcare for sponsoring today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.
Thank you.